Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can take your seats, please. Just a couple of notes first to begin with. As you can probably see, the table layouts have been changed around a little bit. So we've gone to the round tables, but that does mean that if you've left stuff before lunch or something, they might have been moved around. If you're missing, or if your bag isn't where you thought it was going to be, we've moved everything to the front reception. There's other smaller things like little notebooks, which I'll be taking to the front in the middle in the minute as well. Another kind of fits notes. We've got a selection of notes and almost loose leaf paper that might have been left behind. If there's something important that you might have written down that you need, then we've got a collection of those at the front as well. So I apologize for the change of the shape of the tables, but I apologize for any inconvenience caused, but we've got all the stuff. They're just either at the registration desk or perhaps at the back of the room. The other slight change is the final session will begin at 3:45, so it'll be slightly shorter coffee break. So instead of starting at 4, it will start at 3:45. Yeah, that sounds about right. And these are the think tanks. If you haven't attended one of our conferences before where we've had the think tanks, these are often one of the most popular parts of the whole conference. So they're just small groups where you can have just, smaller discussions where you can go into detail, touch things that perhaps you wouldn't, questions that you might not want to ask in front of the panel, an answer that you wouldn't give if you were in front of 100 people in a panel. It's a chance to have smaller discussions. Often the first 5 minutes or even 2 minutes are a little bit awkward as people, introduce themselves and wonder what the heck's going on. But my normal challenge is at 3 o'clock when the think tanks are finished is trying to shut everybody up because the discussions really get rolling. At the end of the think tanks, we're going to ask each leader of the think tank to just give a brief overview of what was discussed. Not to recover the whole hour, but just to say these are some of the highlights of what was discussed. We don't necessarily want to know who said it or what was said, but we just want to know an overview of what was discussed because there's a lot of people who would have wanted to be in more than one session. So we'll be doing that highlight at 3 o'clock with the think tank session. So enjoy the next hour, be honest, share business cards, network, and share ideas. We'll look forward to hearing the highlights at 3 o'clock. Thank you. Tanks, just to give a very brief overview on what was discussed during your think tank. So I'll start at number 1, which is always a good place to start. Over-the-road visibility. So Melissa from Grupo Antolin, can you tell us a very brief overview of what you discussed?
Some of what we talked about today with over-the-road visibility is the amount of different systems that are out there right now and the different technology that's out there and how to bring them all together so that you're able to start looking at the possibility of doing some of the hyper-connective shipping and also looking at how to gather some of the data from the visibility and actually using that in a way that's going to be meaningful.
Thank you very much. Number 2 was, I think, the aftermarket. So who's leading the aftermarket?
Yeah, so in the aftermarket, we talked about a pretty big range of things. You talked about being the hyper-connected physical internet. That was certainly a topic of discussion. We definitely see from an aftermarket advantage, there could be a lot of applicability to that. I think collaboration would be one of the big challenges in that, and kind of service times and being able to leverage that network and getting all the OEMs to work together for service perspective. One of the big conversations we talked about was really servicing millennials and 3D printing, kind of the future of aftermarket and the things that may present challenges. We said the millennials could be both more prone to be a DIY type person, to look things up, buy the part themselves, watch it on YouTube and fix it, whereas they would also be the most likely to potentially just bring it in and get it fixed through the dealership. I think, again, I think one of two of the major themes we saw was from, aftermarket and production purchasing groups are typically separated. We saw that there's There's definite need for collaboration in the production planning side of it for materials management, but typically within the OEs, they're separated from a buying perspective. And then the campaign supply or campaign recalls, those are not typically run through the traditional network when they're kind of oddball shape, size. It's really dependent on the type of recall or campaign that's being supported. So.
Thank you very much, and we'll go over to the packaging. Who really pays the price for poor packaging? Thank you, Drew.
Thanks, Louis. We had a good discussion. We had 2 EMs and a Tier 1 at our table. So I think we answered quickly who really pays the price for poor packaging. It's everybody, the OEM, supplier, and the environment. But more importantly, we went down the road of, okay, what's driving that? How does that manifest itself? Typically, it's around some type of cardboard substitution that suboptimizes the supply chain. So we broke that into 2 different areas of where we could look, and there was a lot of great knowledge shared, some which we'll keep within the table, but from a high-level standpoint, we looked at design, thinking of the entire supply chain and not just maybe a line-side presentation, and some of the opportunities, especially given the geography of the U.S., really bringing transportation more into that conversation and looking at landed cost. We talked a little bit about dunnage, the internal dunnage inside the containers, having fixed versus cardboard all the time that's thrown away, or maybe some generic inserts and the pros and cons of that. And then it really moved away from the design of the package more around poor packaging management. Big challenge seems to be between the OEMs and Tier 1s is fleet size. The 830 you can pretty much throw out the first day you get it because it's an average. And so when you have peaks and valleys, how many containers are sized for that loop? Whether they're using batch or line production at the supplier, we know there tends to be a little more batch at the supplier level. Are they addressing that, and are enough days allotted? So are there some models out there where we could look at that? Push and pull versus packaging, ownership of the OEM versus the supplier. I mean, we went through the wide gambit. It was a good conversation. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Drew. And inbound transportation, Kevin.
Thanks, Louis. So we had a couple OEMs and Tier 1s and 3PLs and service providers. So we started out the conversation with the theme with sub-tier ordering. So how we're going back in our supply chains and ordering parts. We kind of compared and contrasted the methods that Honda's been using with the buy-sell transactions versus Fiat Chrysler using a consignment approach, and kind of comparing notes on how that works and how it drives different levels of ownership in the process. And then that kind of turned into how does sub-tier ordering, how does that turn into shared freight opportunities, and kind of discussed the views of that, how from it came down to from our perspective that sub-tier gives a little more flexibility to do that, shared channels, because I can influence the purchase frequency and the volumes much easier than I can going into our factories, which are really at a super JIT level. Likewise, and that kind of turned the whole conversation of efforts that we've had over the years with sharing freight with other OEMs and experiences with that. And the criteria, I think we're all kind of concluded that in our everybody's best interests, we try to find freight that has a level of demand to it, that's somewhat predictable, so that your business model and a business case that you put together isn't thrown out the window after 2 weeks of starting it up. And then, of course, there's always a reflection period that you should have some KPIs to kind of review to make sure that those benefits are continuously bringing value to the companies that are participating. Because again, over time, things change, right? The model mix changes, the volumes changes, and sometimes that will throw that business case out the window. And then start talking about some discussions about TMS systems, internal systems, upgrade, cost-benefit analysis, homegrown systems. A lot of discussion about that, trying to develop systems that capture every needle in a haystack type of mentality, trying to explain our internal supply chain partners. We can't, capture every single thing. We'll try to minimize those issues as much as we can and bring visibility to those. And that kind of drove into some discussion about, again, poor weather in the States, some experiences over the past couple of years, especially down here in the South where it's kind of crippled I-20 for extended periods of time and kind of brought this whole area to its knees there a couple of years ago. So that was kind of some reflections on that. And then last, we kind of talked about using rail. Our friends from Fiat Chrysler have done a fantastic job in using rail. And so we asked a lot of questions out of them, how they're able to accomplish that. And again, the response is the business case kind of drives that. And they're able to take advantage of rail probably a lot more than I know from our standpoint than we can. So that was kind of finished up the discussion on inbound transportation.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That sounded like a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much. And now last but definitely not least, integrated logistics solutions. You go.
Thank you, Louis. So we talked about integrated logistics solutions and the 3.6 PL, a little eye catcher that was received with a little bit of skepticism at the table. But anyways, we talked about which companies, logistic providers or OEMs or 4PLs or whoever are in charge of integrating a wide set of logistic services and solutions into one, what we like to call the super supply chain. We talked a little bit about what must be done to do this, what are possible pitfalls and difficulties trying to do this, and also finally, like, what is the critical success factors of actually doing this. We talked about how relationships and partnerships is one of the most important things in being able to have like an integrated solution between several companies, several parties, and deliver a good product. We found that some of the big disruptors to creating something like this is talent, people. You need to have good people, you need to have the type of talent that can secure your operations and secure cooperation and communication between all involved parties in such an integrated logistics solution. We also talked about how different systems, different standards, too many different IT systems or whatever can cause a lot of problems, cause difficulties if you try to do such an integrated solution. It often becomes in different companies, different organizations, or also within the organizations you have different silos, which kind of sets a barrier for cooperation and communication. Finally, we kind of concluded that the most important things, if you're trying to put in motion such an integrated solution, you need to have communication, transparency, and especially clarity or clear communication between all parties.
Thank you very much, Vigard. I hope you enjoyed the roundtable think tanks. I hope you got to experience what they're about being small and having a chance to have smaller conversations. I'm sure the word intimate's not quite what I want to say, but I hope it gives you an idea of what I'm trying to get across. But if anyone does want to have an intimate conversation, my room number is... But I hope you've enjoyed it, and enjoy some coffee, hosted by our friend Sergère, and we'll see you back in this room at 3:45 for the main and final closing panel. Thank you very much, everyone.